Hi, everybody. My name is Faisal Chaudhry. Welcome to the Branding Deep Dive podcast with your wonderful co-hosts, Ahmed Cheema and Abdul Mannan. Today, we're diving into what drives the loyalty of the Republican Party.
Faisal, man, it's nice to see you. I know we have a book club and we see each other every week, but this is something that is special for me. To have you on a podcast it's quite an honor. I know your last public appearance on a stage like this, they spelled your name wrong. Not your last, but like one of your public appearances. So we'll make our best effort to make sure that we get your name right.
I was gonna say you're our first ever guest on our podcast.
Oh, wow. Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here, guys. And it's great seeing you guys outside of book club, too, I have to say. And please...
We're not any different, if you're wondering.
And feel free to misspell my name. Like, it's okay.
Before we get into it, I wanted to ask, Faisal, if you could kind of just give a little bit of a background on who you are, what you do, that kind of thing. And then, of course, if you miss any gaps that I feel are important, I'll chime in as well. So who is Faisal Chaudhry?
I think, I guess what's relevant to today's discussion, right, is my bachelor's was in political science. And I've kind of, I'm one of those people who like follow politics instead of following sports. You know what I mean? Like I am very well versed in that arena.
Just to give a little bit more background, Faisal Chaudhry is a medical school student. He's at Johns Hopkins University. He was the director of Miss Detroit here in our area. And so we actually met him. I don't know about Abdul Mannan, but I met him when he was a director here. And he did a lot of work in this Canton, Detroit area. So we've known each other for a while. And so I'm really excited to kind of get into it. Faisal has always had beliefs and views that have been a little bit contrary to what everyone else is thinking because he actually takes the time to understand and read and learn about it. So that's why we wanted to have you on, is because, a lot of these people that we might have interviewed would have just said what they hear, right? And we don't want that. We want to have a little bit of a more thoughtful approach to this. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
Is this going to be like a non-biased conversation where we just kind of talk about?
I mean, you can't talk about Trump in a non-biased way.
Okay.
Objectively.
I think politics, yeah, it's tough to do that. So
okay, for sure.
mean, let's try our best to not do that, but I'm sure some of it will.
Maybe we should like start off with like I am a moderate. You know what I mean? Like this is my bias. You know what I mean?
All right. So, yeah, there we go.
So that's kind of color our commentary today, right?
Yeah. All right, moderate. Not an establishment Dem.
I mean, progressives would say I'm an establishment Dem. But
that's true.
Anyway.
That's true.
Okay, that's interesting, right? So these labels that we have, let's talk a little bit about those before we actually get into anything, right? What are you guys even talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of labels out there, and some are more meaningful than others. Some are co-opted. I think a lot of times when people call themselves something, you have to look at the record and see if there's any substance to their claim. Yeah.
If I identify with this label, like I feel the sense of loyalty toward this label, like where did that come from for the average person?
Yeah. So I think for the average voter, Democrat and Republican are probably the most important labels or the most significant labels. We can talk about kind of when the party's founded, but both of them have been around for more than 100 years now. And what's interesting is like they flip-flopped on issues, you know what I mean? So that's why I think the party labels are more important than necessarily conservative and liberal, because when the Republicans were founded, they were actually the liberal party. And the positions of the two have switched on the political spectrum. In terms of labeling, the GOP or Republican is the more important brand name than conservative or evangelical or white supremacist these days. And the same goes on the Democratic side, instead of progressive or establishment, usually Democrat comes first.
So the next question I have is for Abdul Mannan, and that is like you see in branding and marketing, these people feel such a sense of loyalty to these labels, right? Why is that? Like what's driving this loyalty that they have towards whatever the label is, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's a ton more, but like what's driving the feelings of loyalty here?
If there's one thing that's driving it all, it's all common values. So if you have a party or a label that you identify with, what that means is you're usually identifying with the value system that whatever it is you're loyal to. So you have your people that are interested in, or that are loyal to the Republican Party. It means their values are the same. Their values align. And then if you have progressives, their values are aligning with the people that they are loyal to. So it's all about value, honestly. And I think what Faisal was getting at when he talked about Republican versus conservative is that values change over time, and therefore, potential like allegiances change over time. But yeah, right back at you, Faisal. So like we were talking about where we're at right now with the Republican Party. How are they? What are they branding themselves on?
The GOP is kind of the party of Trump, nationally speaking. Their values are whatever values he happens to have in any given moment. They've kind of given up on the notion of any sort of comprehensive platform or anything like that. For 2020, they actually didn't even bother coming up with a party platform or like kind of like their agenda for the next 4 years. They basically they literally just copied and pasted their 2016 party platform and passed it again in 2020. And they blamed COVID for that, but the Democrats have their new agenda, right? And so again, the Republican Party has been totally hijacked by this cult of personality around Trump.
And it hasn't actually changed their loyalty base, their tribe. So you're saying it went from some ideals of Republican Party to the value system of Trump, and it hasn't changed the population because he won in 2016, and he has significant following still. And so, despite the fact that the brand changed, or like the value of the brand changed, the party themselves and their loyalty hasn't changed. Like no one has dropped away from the Republican Party because of Trump.
So I guess that's what we'll see in in 1.5 weeks, right?
I mean, the polls say, I feel like I've seen some statistics online saying that he's doing pretty good.
So again, polling is only as good as garbage in, garbage out in terms of data for polling. That's what we kind of learned from 2016. But if we look at the 2018 midterm elections, as a kind of a concrete, obviously Trump wasn't on the ballot, but Trump was on the ballot because all Republicans are linked to him.
Right.
You could see that, yes, a significant portion of suburbia has slipped away from Republican control, and is now kind of firmly or semi-firmly in Democratic hands. So you can say kind of those white middle class educated voters who traditionally were Republicans, are switching over to the blue. And you can see that in Michigan in particular. If you look at Oakland County over the past decade really has been becoming more and more blue. But if you look at the 2018 midterm elections, like nobody would have guessed, like Alyssa Slotkin's district would have, Alyssa Slotkin, who's a Democrat, could have won her district because it's so rural, and it was gerrymandered to be Republican. But she ended up winning in 2018, and the same goes, kind of across the nation. These moderate Democrats are able to pull away voters from the traditional Republican base.
So if I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is that the Republican Party, up until 2016, when Trump first came on, they did have a platform. They did have policy and certain values that they represented, and their audience, their target audience, was people that also believed in those core values. Now, Trump has shifted that from a brand that is based on values to a brand that is based on just personality, correct?
Yeah.
Wow. How has he been able to do that?
Well, I think there is a lot of overlap. Would you agree, Faisal?
Yes. So Trump has, Trump used to be a liberal, right? Like,
Yeah.
in the early 2000s, he would have he supported and donated to Democratic candidates.
Oh, liberal, really?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like him and the Clintons used to be good friends. Like, yeah, like legit. Like, Hillary Clinton was a senator from New York for 8 odd years, I think. So Trump definitely did change his values to fit the kind of the traditional Republican mold. But he like it's he like subsumed the party. Like he went above and beyond, you know what I mean, just kind of conforming himself. He also conformed the party to fit him. So like, he is now kind of anti-abortion, which is a huge deal for Republicans and the Republican base. And there's other things, clearly in the past he was always slightly xenophobic, explicitly racist. So those things kind of helped ease him into the Republican Party. But there's other things where he's just flat out like he is, like in terms of free trade, for example, like he's against kind of the traditional Republican Party platform of free trade everywhere and anywhere, and he is very much not kind of in that mold.
Interesting. Still in this election.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of his big things in 2016. I'm going to renegotiate NAFTA to make it fairer for the American worker and whatever. They basically just put window dressing on NAFTA and said they renegotiated it. But like he is like, Republicans have always kind of been traditionally were kind of the party of big business. Big business likes free trade because that means bigger business. And yeah, Trump has gone in the opposite direction, kind of Bernie Sanders style, honestly, on that one issue.
You're saying if someone else was to do things like that, they would be kind of kicked out of the party type deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like not just in terms of his values, but also like the actual things that he's done, like, right, like in terms of his like marital infidelities and like all that.
Oh yeah, gotcha. Can we back up to the last election? Because from what I remember, is no one thought that Trump was going to win, right? So I think there's a huge marketing lesson in just his whole narrative that happened there. And so I want to talk about a little bit, whereas like, how did he approach that? Who his target audiences and how he spoke to them so well versus all the other candidates, right? So let's start with that. Like, who's his base?
Yeah. So I think how Trump won the 2016 election was kind of by figuring out like his base was geographic. Like first and foremost, he needed to win Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida. And I don't know what marketing.
Wait. Before you go on, like again, why were these states he needed to win?
Just because in the U.S. we have the Electoral College. So it doesn't matter who wins the popular vote, like who wins the total number of votes cast across the nation. What matters is how many votes, how many states you win, kind of in a weird formula.
So these were, what you're saying is these were swing states, and he needed to win them.
Yes.
Okay.
He needed to win outright majorities in those states. And even if he, what I mean, and it didn't matter like how badly he lost in California and New York.
Gotcha. And so he started with this understanding of who it is he needs to flip, correct? And then what did he do?
Flip or just motivate to get out to vote. And so I think that was the first part of his strategy was, making sure that he turns out his own voters kind of in crucial states. And the second part of his strategy was make sure that Clinton voters don't go out to vote.
In the swing states.
Yes.
Because
yes. I mean, nationally turnout was depressed. Okay. But yeah, like he definitely made sure to hit up like, the swing states in particular.
Because I was gonna say I'm in West Virginia, and I think historically it was actually blue, and I think now it's more red. Yep. And so what you're saying is that my vote is basically not going to count if I go blue.
I mean, in this coming election, West Virginia, I mean, the polls are close. Yeah. So you never know.
Right? All
right. Also, this is a good time for the disclaimer. Go and vote. Okay. Don't be one of those like buffoons who are like, oh, I'm going to prove a point by not voting. Okay. You not voting means that you're okay with the status quo, like in any election. In any
Yeah.
election, you not voting says that you're not okay, or sorry, you're okay with the status quo. So if you're not okay with the status quo, then this is your chance. Instead of having to like go out in the streets and protest like in other countries, you have the chance to vote for a different political leadership. So don't be an idiot. Go and
So
vote.
what Faisal just did there is he used a logical appeal to try to convert people that might be on the fence, right? So that's an excellent job, excellent marketing, advertising, and well done, Faisal.
Thanks.
Right?
Actually,
I'm going to vote now.
Yeah. Going back to what Cheema said, Cheema, you said that, no one expected Trump to win. But what's so interesting is the fact that he won meant that he actually put in time to understand what his potential target audience actually looks like. Because it wasn't that no one expected them to win. It was that no one expected like the Republicans to turn out. And part of it was that I noticed that when I'm here in West Virginia and I'm talking to a lot of people, I don't talk to Republicans. I talk to what you would call closet Republicans. They don't talk about the fact that they're Republican, but they'll subtly mention in their conversations that, they lean one way versus the other. And I think that was a big thing, is that he knew that there was this hidden population that votes that he just needed to tap into. So like, I'm definitely sure he did his research, target audience research. And then, which makes a lot of sense because Faisal said that he originally started, liberal, or he was leaning Democratic, but then he's like, my chance to win is probably better tapping into this hidden population that a lot of people don't expect to turn out.
So that is okay. So this is what I want to explore right now, and you hit it a little bit, but I want your insight on this. And we have these people that are closet Republicans that are probably not going to turn out if it's someone that they don't really like, right? How did Trump convince them to get up, get out? How did he convert those dormant voters into active voters? Is my question. Like
from hidden to like very public out there.
Yes. Yeah.
I think especially in 2016, Trump realized that Americans were angry. Like across the political spectrum, you can see, from the results of the primary too on the Democratic side, right? Bernie almost beat Clinton, almost beat Clinton. So you could kind of see, but on both the left and the right, people, people were angry and upset with the status quo. They were frustrated.
Okay. Hold on. By status quo, you mean by the people that are currently in government and what they're doing, their policies.
Yeah. And kind of the direction, I guess, of kind of the country, I guess, more generally speaking. Yeah.
Okay.
He harnessed that, you know what I mean? Like, people weren't looking for, comfortable routine, right? They were looking for somebody who would, tear things up and, somebody like Trump, who wasn't a career politician, who said things that you're not supposed to say, who was not at all who is not at all PC, right? And so, that's something that he was able to tap into, kind of that deep-seated like resentment almost for some voters. He was able to tap into that and, get them to turn out to vote.
Just the fact that he was not PC makes him break status quo.
One thing I wanted to touch on is that we have his campaign slogan, right, which is Make America Great Again, MAGA. Now, when we're talking about breaking the status quo, there's really two ways you can go. And I was reading the book, Ride of a Lifetime, Bob Iger. And so what's happening in there, just for some context for the audience, and I don't know if you guys have read it, is that Michael Eisner, who was the CEO of Disney at the time, had a political falling out with the board. And so they were kicking him out. And now Bob Iger wants the position of CEO. And his strategy was, I need to distance myself from the decisions that Michael Eisner made. I've spent 10 years under his leadership, and now I need to show the board, I need to convince them that I'm not going to be the same person. And so his approach was, we're talking about the future. And what Trump did, and this is why I bring this story up, is that there's really two ways you can go. You either talk about the future and what the future holds and what we're going to do in the future, kind of like what Obama did, change we can believe in, that kind of thing, versus Trump went to the past. Like, what is it about his audience base, like what made him decide to go with the past rather than go with the future?
Even his slogan itself, he ripped it off of Reagan. Reagan's slogan was "Let's make America great again." So I think like John Oliver made the joke like, oh, it was just slightly more polite. Like at least Reagan was slightly more polite. But like even the slogan itself was a throwback. In addition to it like itself being a throwback. But anyways, I think if you look at his voters, it makes sense, why they would want to go backwards and not forwards. Overwhelmingly.
Can you expand on that? That's a really good point.
Yeah, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly non-college educated, overwhelmingly male, non-urban.
So versus the Democratic Party, whose base, you'll have a lot more immigrants and people that want future advancements that haven't seen the glory days of the past, correct? Or the past is like for Black voters, for example, the past is not where we want to go.
I would also say like there's not a sense of entitlement with those voters as well. Those types of voters, in the Democratic Party have faced difficulties in their life, and continually face difficulties in their life, so they understand how government can help them, and like they're not resentful when somebody else gets ahead of them. But if you look at at least a portion of the Republican Party, like Malcolm X said, there's going to be some white people who are always going to be resentful when a Black person is richer than them. Like that's just kind of the problem with racism, or a problem with racism.
That reminds me of a point, which is I don't think it's really related, but you just reminded me. But when LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh decided to go to Miami, there were a lot of people, and what Dwayne Wade describes is that like people just had pure hatred for them. And I remember him talking with JJ Redick on a podcast, is that part of that hatred was just the fact that this institution, the NBA, which was generally controlled by white owners, white commissioners, and they made the shots. Now these three Black talented superstars have decided to make a decision for themselves, right? And so part of that hatred coming from that, not really related to what we were talking about, but I just wanted to, there is that sense of when you see people take their destiny into their own hands, you do spark a sense of hatred in other people. So
and I think Trump also definitely ran as I'm not Obama, I'm a white guy. It's okay, you know what I mean? And for a certain segment of the Republican Party. And I remember on election night, some CNN anchor, I can't remember who, called it like a white lash. Yeah. And so, you know what I mean? Like, Trump's election was a white lash, from all these kind of angry people who were, upset for all the upset for potentially many reasons, but at least some of them were upset just because of the race thing.
Faisal, man, you've really, so far, I think there's a lot of lessons we've learned. I think it's interesting, and I wanted to touch on this in the beginning, but we kind of jumped right into it, is that the term, and we mentioned this on the last podcast too, but the term for a political run is what, Faisal? What do you call that? A campaign, right? So it's like it's called a political campaign. And in marketing, we use the same terminology. Like if you're running an ad, it's an ad campaign, right? So there's a lot of parallels. It's a lot of, like Faisal already mentioned, is that Trump did a really great job of understanding who his target audience was and understanding how to speak to them. And he was able to take those people from people that may not have voted and really inspire them to actually take action. And that's what marketing is all about. Marketing is about inspiring change, right? Riling people up so they take some form of action.
There is actually an interesting history. Like, I don't know too much about it, but there is an interesting history of like back when political campaigns like became modern, like kind of in the like LBJ, JFK era, like it was like Mad Men, like, you know what I mean? Like it was those first kind of professional marketers who got involved with the political campaigns and like taught them how to how to effectively market, subsegment their markets, and target, different messages to different people. So like those two, like the two industries actually have a lot in common.
We talked a little bit about who his people are, who his supporters are, but what are the actual things that he's calling for? I know one thing right off the top of my head. You guys are all familiar with this. You all heard this last election is the wall, right? We're going to build a wall, right? What are some other things that he used to kind of, what's some of the messaging he used to inspire his audience?
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the biggest differences between 2016 and 2020. In 2016, he kind of had that, like, he had that alternate slogan or whatever, you know what I mean? Like that idea that people could latch onto, which was build a wall. This time around, he's really been struggling for kind of like a simple idea, and like a simple slogan. So it's kind of hard to say this time around, what is he for other than just continued power, right? I think lately he's kind of been on a law and order bend. He's been throwing that in there a lot. I will return law and order to suburbs, which is really just a dog whistle for I will keep your suburbs white. And we'll see if that works. Hopefully it doesn't work. But that's kind of his. I think that's his attempt at recreating kind of the mystique around Build a Wall.
Yeah. What did you think of that one Hassan Minhaj clip that I sent you where they're talking about the Republican Party being like Chipotle, where their menu is very limited, meaning their policy is very limited. It's like God, guns, abortion, and taxes, or like no taxes or something like that.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty accurate. Like they have very few talking points, like the Republican Party, and actually, even though they're few, everyone understands what they're about. So it's like. There's no ambiguity, and one of the things I realized the Democratic Party that is something that the Democratic Party didn't have, is because they're talking about a lot of things that I felt like I didn't understand what they were talking about, and maybe it might just be the fact that I was Canadian and I didn't know the U.S. Political history, but like stuff like Green New Deal, right? What was that about? What the heck is a Green New Deal? Like, what was the old deal? And two,
How
like
did you
now,
pass your citizenship test?
Hey, those questions are actually very difficult. It was youth history, not necessarily about political like policy. But and then the other one was like more recently, like abolish the police, right? And when I talked to my more progressive friends, and when all of this first started coming out, I asked them, I was like, what does abolish the police mean? And the very common answer that I got was, well, it can mean a lot of things. And then so there, I did some reading, I did some research on some articles. I'm like, is this abolish the police? And they're like, yeah, kind of, but not really. This is the author's opinion, but and so their platform is ambiguous compared to the Republican platform. Do you agree? And can you elaborate on why that's such a good selling point?
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, Republicans have historically, like in the modern times, been much better at branding. At branding than the Democratic Party. And you pointed out they do a good job of kind of simplifying their message into just a couple kind of key
sound bites.
Exactly, yeah. And Democrats have always struggled with that.
That's can we talk a little bit about the Green New Deal and what happened?
Oh yeah, you did have something to say about it.
Yeah, so the Green New Deal, I think it can make like a Harvard, like a HBS case study on how not to roll out a marketing campaign.
What's HBS? I thought it was HBR, Harvard Business Review.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Harvard Business School.
No, that was a Freudian slip. I call it HBS sometimes because some of their stuff is just BS.
BS.
You're trying to get us canceled? Come on, man.
But I forget. Oh, we were talking about the Green New Deal, right? So like just how they rolled it out. The day before their big press conference, a draft of it was leaked, which was much more controversial than the actual proposal. And the Democrats thought like, okay, this is cool. If we have a catchy name, we have a brand, and it's going to work for us. Because the original New Deal, I wouldn't call it the old deal, but the original New Deal was a democratic, like FDR came out with it basically to combat the Great Depression, before World War II. And it was hugely successful in terms of both politically and like marketing wise. You know what I mean? Like people are still talking about the New Deal to this day because of how successful it was. Yeah, so that, that's what the Democrats are kind of hoping on. Okay, it's a package of climate change initiatives, and we're going to call it the Green New Deal. But what they didn't realize is that like a catchy name would make it that much more easier to demonize, and that's what the Republicans have done. They took that draft, proposal, and and even the kind of the current proposal, and they twisted it kind of out of proportion. It wasn't the most logical proposal to begin with, anyways.
What would you say? Well, so it sounds like the leak was more the problem than the deal itself, unless you're saying otherwise.
I think it was both.
Okay.
I think there was a lack of support within the Democratic Party for it, outside of the progressive wing.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So they didn't even have their whole party behind it. You know what I mean? And they botched the the rollout of it, which again the totality of that has allowed the Republicans to like take the Green New Deal. You know what I mean? Like take the brand away from the Republican Party, or sorry, the Democratic Party, and kind of run with it to make it like seem like some scary new thing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the discussion we had last week, and one of the things that the other friend that we had on said was that like Republicans are very good at taking like lines of attack in messaging, right? Like understanding, like let's boil this down, make it as dumb as possible, and then let's attack with it. And so what he said was if the Green New Deal was executed properly, it would have been 3 key points. And so I think with the draft, like Faisal kind of mentioned, it was all over the place. It was really lengthy. There was so much going on. What it should have been was jobs, infrastructure, green economy. But what happened is Republicans took it and they were able to twist it into a big government overreach, right? Like, and that is something, Abdul Mannan, I want to get your thoughts on this a little bit too, is like in marketing, it's so important to understand where the momentum is going and then pivot accordingly as well, right? Especially when you're in competition, you have to understand, like, hey, how can I spin this story? We talk a little bit about spinning, right? Where's the narrative going? Who's the hero in this story? And how do I spin it in a way where we're the heroes now, right? So Democrats were coming in, they were saying, hey, look, we have the Green New Deal, we're the heroes. And then they're able to take a look at 1 or 2 things and say, hey, you're actually not the heroes. We're the heroes because you guys are trying to overreach the government and really expand the role of the government way beyond what we want. And so now people are getting behind the Republicans because they don't want the government to overreach, right? They want their freedom, they want their guns, that kind of thing, right?
They basically spun the narrative based on their own values, right? We talked about them being like, anti-government involvement. And so they're like, they played to their strengths. They used their opponent's marketing and played it to their strengths. They saw it for what it was, or maybe they looked a little bit too much into it and saw what they wanted to see. But either way, it was a great move by the Republicans. And then going back to Cheema, like what you said, I forgot what you said earlier. Oh, simplifying your message, bringing it down to the layman, and being able to explain your policy in a few quick words, even though it sounds like a very it sounds like a dumb, like it sounds like a, I don't know, I guess what I'm trying to say is like it sounds like something you shouldn't do, but it's really what you should do, because to be able to explain it in a very simple way, that helps your branding a lot, right? Like the messaging that you deliver has to be simple. And you see this with all sort of campaigns, and I'm sure you think about like Apple, Nike are the ones that come into mind. Just do it, think different. I don't know what some of the other ones are, but very simple, right? And Republicans are capitalizing on it. Build a wall.
Yeah, there's 2 things. Yeah, there's 2 things I want to touch on here. Is our friend used the word co-opted? Faisal, can you explain what that means?
Yeah, and I was just gonna kind of talk about that as well. I think you need to make sure that you control your message. In the political sphere and in the marketing sphere. You're right. Like think different was actually Apple's response, or Apple taking control of IBM's message, which was think. You know what I mean? And so the same goes, with the Green New Deal. The Democrats did it. They kind of successfully took Obamacare. You know what I mean? And like they took it away. It was meant as an insult. They took control of the message away from the Republicans, and so now Obamacare is like, oh, Obama cares. You know what I mean? Like it's seen as more of a positive. And yeah, that's that's something the Republicans have have both parties, I guess, have had good experiences with.
It's interesting you bring up Obamacare because you see that the Republican Party doesn't really get co-opted, but the Democratic Party does, right? Like in the example of the Green New Deal, we got Obamacare, where it's like since Trump has been in power, like Obamacare is they've turned it into like a negative connotation type thing. Let's dive back a little bit. I know we talked about this in our last conversation, but let's talk about some of these campaigns that they've run in the past, whether it's war on terror, war on drugs. What else have we seen come out of the Republican Party? And then I know we talked about one of the Democratic Party failures that happened too. And so let's touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think in terms of kind of like the modern Republican Party, like it would kind of start with Nixon and his law and order. So like, again, in 2020, Trump is kind of using rhetoric from the past. Nixon was the first president to kind of run on a law and order campaign. Even back then, it was very clearly a dog whistle, saying that it's okay, I'm racist, and it's okay that racists are going to vote for me. Again, to keep our neighborhoods and our suburbs white.
So you keep mentioning this thing called dog whistling. I think I want you to kind of clarify what that means to our audience, and I feel like there's a branding principle in there.
This is gonna be a really bad explanation. It's like you're signaling your audience something like implicitly without saying it explicitly.
And what's the power of that?
And it's always a dog whistle is always a negative connotation. You know what I mean? It's not like a positive thing that you're implicitly saying. It's a negative thing that you're implicitly saying.
Okay, so I think that's really important that we dived into this, because Abdul Mannan, I remember we were talking about these closet Republicans, these closet racists, you want to say it? It's like he's dog whistling. Like a dog whistle is something where human ears doesn't pick up on, right? But dogs, it drives them insane. They start barking like crazy, like that kind of thing. So when he is saying these things, like to the regular person, it may seem like, oh, like there's, he's a little bit weird, a little bit racist, but whatever. But to these people that are, let's say his dogs, in a sense, I don't want to use that. Okay, let's say his truly loyal supporters,
his tribe,
that takes them from the closet to out loud. We got Trump signs in our yard, crazy, like super
red
support.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's I think the lesson here is really understanding. Again, it all comes back to understanding who your target audience is, and knowing, not just understanding who they are, knowing how to speak to them, right? Knowing what is going to strike a chord with them, and then executing on that, of course. But back to the co-opting, and so let's talk a little bit about those, like war on terror, war on drugs. What was that? How did they, like, what are these campaigns that we've seen in the past? Like, what's the purpose, and how have they kind of executed on these?
Yeah. So I mean, I would say war on drugs and the war on terror are less of co-opting. I don't think that's really occurring. There's really no precedent. Prior to, I think it was, I want to say it was also Nixon, but it might have been Reagan who kind of declared a war on drugs. No American president had ever kind of declared war on
on a thing,
like on an intangible. But as I'm saying this, I think I'm wrong. I think LBJ actually did declare a war on poverty, so maybe it was actually a Republican co-opt of that term. So it could be either way, I guess. But in any case, yeah, the Republicans were very and it's very, like, having, promising these intangible things is very powerful, right? Because that allows you to keep winning the next election. You know what I mean? Like that allows you to tell your audience, tell the voters, And we have made progress, but we have not made enough progress. So that's why you need to vote for me again. That's why you need to donate to my political campaign again. The war on drugs and the war on terror are both ongoing, right? Like we've been fighting the war on drugs for like 50 years, and we've been fighting the war on terror for 20 years, and with no end in sight for either of them, which means that politicians are happy.
Faisal, what we see is when we have slogans, phrasing, and campaigns that are so broad and use these ideas, right? War on terror, war on drugs. What you see is that governments or companies even or individuals are able to use this to justify a lot of the decisions they make, right? So, for example, war on terror, like who doesn't want to fight terror? Everyone wants to fight terror. And so now you can make decisions that may not be the right decision to make because, hey, this is for the war on terror. Like this is a war. You know what I mean? I think 2 points here is that terror, drugs, like these are ideas and things that pretty much everyone across the board wants to help eliminate. And the second thing is the use of the word war, right? Like war it's not just like a fight. It's like, this is something where we need everyone's focus to help us win this. You know what I mean? It takes the inner patriot out of you. And if you don't support this war, then you're not one of us kind of deal. So I think that's a really powerful tool that they've used in the past. And you see this in the past, even with Manifest Destiny, right? You see, we justify doing actions that are clearly, looking back at it in hindsight, it's like clearly like these are wrong decisions that we're making. But since we have this narrative, the story that we tell ourselves that this is our manifest destiny, right? We have to do this. This is something like, you know what I mean? So can we talk a little bit about some of the decisions that our government, I don't want to ban you from any international lists or anything, but can we talk a little bit about some decisions that have been justified using these narratives?
Yeah. So I know that the Iran-Contra, I know we had talked about that. That's definitely an example of that in the war on drugs. But I think an even more relevant and poignant example is actually the war in Iraq, right? Which was a result of the war on terror. The war on terror, was started after 9/11, right? And going after Afghanistan made sense to some extent, at least. But Bush was able to use the war on terror as a rallying point to then intervene in a totally separate geopolitical arena of within the Middle East, and invade a completely different country, which was not at all responsible for what initiated kind of the war on terror, which was 9/11.
There's another point I want to make here.
Okay.
If like, I'm going to cut you off, but I don't want to forget this.
No.
So in our book club that we mentioned earlier, one of the books we read was 1984. And so what's interesting is you have those like 2-minute hate speech and these hate events, and they use that to drive up all these emotions, and people don't really care. You know what I mean? Like I think in one of them, didn't they change who the opponent was mid-speech?
Yeah.
And then it was a little brief confusion, but then after it, they just kept, yeah, let's go. Right. So I think what's interesting is what you're highlighting is that the purpose of these slogans is to really rally people behind, and then the decisions and actions that the government makes, not as many people are focused on that actually. And so diverging the focus to the rally call, and then you have the support you need to actually do whatever you want to do. Right. So sorry to cut you off, but
no,
I really just wanted to touch on that.
Like, Bush didn't just use the war on terror, right? He also coined the term like axis of evil, again, to justify, that war in Iraq, and his speechwriter later came out and was like, yeah, we basically just needed Iraq in there. And then we kind of just, came up with a couple other countries that we could toss in there, you know what I mean? Like to pretend they were equivalent. But really the purpose of that term axis of evil was to justify the invasion of Iraq, and like I said, the Republicans using the term war on terror helped justify that as well.
I do want to say, like, we've been focused a lot on the negative aspects, but I think you can use these same principles to drive positive change, right? And we do see that, right? like No Child Left Behind, for example?
I mean, okay, so that's interesting that you picked that example. The legislation was largely seen as a failure and was basically erased off the books over the Obama era. But anyway, I see what you're saying. You know what I mean? So the classic example of kind of marketing and sloganing in the political arena, especially on the progressive side, is the New Deal by FDR and the Great Society by LBJ. You know, these massive expansions of the government, Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, right? You know, which have, you know, helped prolong and improve the quality of life of so many people in the U.S. And it wouldn't largely, like, honestly, it may not have happened without kind of the marketing geniuses within, you know, FDR's and LBJ's inner circles.
That's a really good point. And I want to bring it back. I think it's been kind of a long session already, but I definitely don't want to close off without talking about the visual identity, the donkey and the elephant, red, blue. I know I asked you this, the last presidential debate happened this Wednesday?
Yesterday? I thought
Tuesday?
it was yesterday.
It was a couple days.
It happened this week.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thursday,
Yeah.
I think.
Thursday. And I noticed immediately Joe Biden had on a blue tie and Trump had on a red tie. And the colors we associate with both these parties are Republican red and Democrat blue. So Abdul Mannan, you might know a little bit more about this as well, but let's talk a little bit about their visual identity and how as the audience, as people that are voters, we're easily able to identify which party we belong to just with colors and visual symbols. Because I think that's one of the things that's really important in developing your brand, right? We're talked about these parties represent core values. And so you need a way to easily visually identify which core values that I go with. And then I can, as a member of that party, as a member of that tribe, I need to be able to express that I also believe in these core values. And that's part of what makes you a brand that becomes share-worthy, right? People start sharing these brands, the brand story, the values to other people because they identify with it as well. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Faisal, you want to start by talking about like the fact that they weren't originally, originally conservatives were blue and liberals were red type of thing.
Yeah. So the red and blue thing, that distinction. I mean, it wasn't really chosen by the parties themselves. Like the TV networks at one point in the U.S. kind of decided that, you know, when we're coloring in maps, one's going to be red, one's going to be blue. Overseas, like the interesting thing is overseas, it's flipped. So in the U.S., conservatives are red. Overseas, conservatives are blue.
Even in Canada.
Is that a question or a statement?
No, it's a statement. Yeah, in Canada, Stephen Harper, conservative, blue, Trudeau, red, liberal.
Yeah, and then the Greens are always green.
And the yellows are yellow. The Sikhs in Toronto. In Canada.
I mean, that's in terms of coloring. I think that the Democratic and Republican Party kind of went with it, just because both of them were colors on the flag, and you know what I mean, like vaguely patriotic. So
I think the other thing that's important is the fact that even though it wasn't set for them, they embraced it, and I think part of it is because of red being like the psychology of the color red is basically like anger or alertness or awareness and stuff like that, and I think it really helps like push the particular values that they have right now in the Republican Party when it comes to alerting people about the downhill trajectory of the country and kind of realigning people back onto the trajectory it was, like when we talk about looking towards the past to kind of move forward, and so it's working in their favor. Especially, I don't know what it is about the MAGA hats, but it triggers a lot of people, and if it wasn't for the red, I bet it wouldn't trigger as many people.
It stands out.
They're very noticeable.
Yeah. And actually, what's interesting now is that when you see the Trump posters now, and I see them a lot in West Virginia, that the Keep America Great posters, they're like navy dark blue, and And I bet you're going to, I guess my question, Chima, to you, what do you think of that kind of marketing? Changing from that bright red MAGA to CAG, Keep America Great, and going dark blue. Is it, or maybe Faisal, this is maybe a better question for you, because like, is it the party trying to go into like a status quo mode to try to win the 2020 elections? Or is it more than that? Or is it like a marketing slip? What do you think?
I think it's kind of like maybe in between or neither. Like, I think the reality is, again, like both red and blue and white are all going to seem vaguely patriotic. So like even Trump, like not all GOP candidates have worn red ties to debates.
I've noticed that, yeah.
Trump kind of really buys into that psychological thing. Throughout his entire career, he's always worn power red ties. So he's definitely not going to switch it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For a debate.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely works in his, to his advantage this time around.
Can we talk a little bit about the donkey and that elephant? Like, how did that happen? I'm just trying to understand, like, why. I mean, where we come from back originally, like the donkey was, you know what I mean? Like, it's not something that you would want to associate yourself with. And I would assume, I mean, even in America, actually, you think about it, like one of the ways you can say the word donkey is actually a bad word, right? So how did that happen, and are there any lessons here?
So the elephant, I think, is fairly straightforward. I don't know, it happened out of some political cartoon, and I think the Republicans just kind of took it. An elephant isn't, I guess, the worst animal, right? Like to be your mascot. The donkey is actually a little bit more interesting. Andrew Jackson was a Democrat back when Democrats were conservatives, and he a political cartoonist, kind of like kind of put his face, I think, on the animal of a donkey as an insult, and then he went with it, like, you know what I mean? Like he took with it, he took it and ran, and so he co-opted that symbol of the donkey, like he said, yes, that, like, like this is my symbol, and that that's kind of just stuck with the Democratic Party to present day.
Wait, he was running for presidency? Who's this guy?
I'm sorry, he was a president. He's on our $20 bill.
Okay.
Genocidal, racist, xenophobe.
You say Hugh Jackman? What was the name you said?
Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson. Okay.
Oh my goodness. All right, guys, I really want to make this disclaimer. Abdul Mannan is a relatively new citizen. He's from Canada.
He doesn't read his money, apparently. I don't know what that's about.
It doesn't say Andrew Jackson on the $20.
It says Jackson on the $20.
It says Jackson.
Where's my wallet? I gotta bring this out here.
Oh, but the fact that you confused it with Hugh Jackman, who is an actor.
Okay, no, that was just true. Do you have anything else to add about that? So adopting a negative message is actually a powerful branding move as well. But I wouldn't say. I wonder if it. I mean, it obviously helped them, but the thing about the politics is that the visual identity from the donkey and the elephant is not as strong now, or I don't think it ever was. Like, people in the party or the tribe don't associate with the donkey; they associate with just red versus blue, or left versus right. It's not like the Nike check, which is Nike is like the god of victory, and the check mark is like a sign of accomplishment. That's something that people can get behind. But the donkey and the elephant, I don't think play an important role in the visual identity of the two political parties.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a good point. You don't see donkeys and elephants on their political posters, right?
No, yeah.
I think that's what's that's what's interesting, I guess, as a brand, is that each candidate kind of controls especially their visual identity. And so Obama had that O, right? Like that O is emblematic, right?
Oh yeah.
Of his platform, of kind of that entire era, in 2008.
Yeah, they actually, now that I think about it, they all kind of have their own specific branding.
Exactly, exactly.
Jeb or Bush
Jeb had like Jeb exclamation point.
Exclamation point, yeah.
Like kind of one of those visual markers. So I think that's what, I guess that's why the elephant and the donkey aren't necessarily really needed. because each candidate creates their own, depending on their own strengths and weaknesses or whatever they're trying to, impress upon their audience. I would also add, in the U.S. we're totally literate, whatever, like functionally literate. Overseas, like in India, for example, that's kind of the notable example where illiterate people vote by just like putting their hand on whatever symbol that they identify with. But yeah, it's definitely a thing. Like people collect like the buttons and like pins and stuff. Because over time you can see like in the 50s, like there were 50 styles. Like what I mean? Like it's very much a retro look.
So one of the things that being a new citizen of the country, I'm learning about is that the Republican Party was actually the party of Abraham Lincoln, the party of anti-slavery, the party of anti-KKK, and so. Our first episode on this podcast, I don't know if you heard it, was about the Bronco, the Ford Bronco, and how they are rebranding that Bronco. I wanted to ask you what has changed? Like, how did we go from Abraham Lincoln? How did the party go from Abraham Lincoln to Donald Trump now? And I guess maybe we can talk about a little bit about like some of the elements of rebranding or some of the principles of rebranding that the party used to get where it is now.
I mean, that's a long history, but I think the main point is like it was an evolution. There was a tipping point. Like kind of the election of Nixon, I think is widely regarded as the tipping point, where the modern Republican Party as a conservative, Southern party was established. But yeah, prior to that, it was definitely an evolution over time, where the voters basically, once slavery had been abolished, they wanted to maintain the status quo. So those prior liberals became conservatives, and then and that flipped the other party as well. And you can kind of even see that within the lifetime of current Republicans. What's his face, the GOP leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, he attended civil rights rallies like as a teenager. Like I think he was at the "I Have a Dream" speech by MLK. Like he would have been a progressive as a kid, but then change occurred, and he was okay. Like he wanted the country to stay as it was, so he became a conservative. And that's what happened with the parties as well.
Is there anything in the Republican Party that has stuck, like in terms of value, throughout, like from Abraham to Donald, DJT? I wanted to say conservatism, and I know when we briefly spoke about it, you said there's a difference between political conservatism and what do we say? Philosophical conservatism. Yeah. I figured political conservatism draws from philosophical conservatism, and I think that's the one thing that kind of stays. But you can correct me on that.
So like the Republicans, when they were founded, they were the liberal party. Like they want to change quickly, and so that means that you're a liberal.
Yeah.
And so in terms of their platform, like I would be hard pressed to say anything other than Republicans today are still against slavery. Like I really don't know what else I could say.
Yeah.
Just because their positions have flipped. On the spectrum.
Now, I guess this is a question to the the people that have been American longer than me. My impression is that the current progressives or the liberals didn't know that the party was originally anti-KKK, anti-slavery. Why is that? Like, what is that? Like, how did that perception? How did they adopt that perception? If they did.
Oh, like people don't know their history.
Yeah,
that's really it.
And I think so. The Republican Party or the Democratic Party is just kind of banking on that.
Well, they're banking on that, and the reality that the current situation matters more than what happened 150 years ago, right?
That's true. That's true.
Like GE's brand, right? Like GE is one of those ancient companies, right? For more than 100 years, like their brand back then doesn't matter as to what their brand is today, right? And so the same goes with the political parties as well.
Okay.
Like VW is an example, bringing it back to the auto industry, right? VW was found, they were Nazis, like straight up Nazis. VW, Porsche. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
Hitler rode around and controlled their production. So their brand then, does that really impact consumers' decisions today in terms of which car they're going to buy?
Mm-hmm. So as long as people don't know their history, you can kind of.
No, I think that's a good point that you bring up, and I think it's a deliberate decision on the part of the Republican Party to not bring it up. So you see, we talked about this in the Ford Bronco podcast, is that any brand that has been around that long will have certain stories, narratives that they can use, and they can use their platform to educate their audience on that if it fits the current narrative, right? So similar to exactly what Donald Trump did, is he used Reagan's entire policy, he just brought it back, right? You could have just said, hey, we're going back to like Reagan era, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like you can, he's kind of hoping in their narrative, it works better if you don't have an understanding of history. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if it served their narrative and it served their audience, I think they would use these pieces of history to push whatever it is they want to push.
Yeah.
And,
Which is what you see them do now.
Yeah, and you'll see like Republicans, Trump tried to do that, on Thursday night, right, during the debate. So they try to do that occasionally, but the reality is, right, like people understand that they are no longer that party. Mm-hmm. Democrats also run away from their history. You know what I mean? The history of the Democratic Party is genocidal, xenophobic, racist, segregationist. You know what I mean? And sexist. Mm-hmm. All this. You know what I mean? Just because they were the conservative party for so long. And yeah, very much so. The Democrats run away from their history.
I want to say, Faisal, thank you so much for taking the time out to sit with us, explain to us the branding of the Republican Party. I learned a lot. Thank you for shedding light on this topic. And we hope and we ask that we can have you again soon.
Yeah, of course. It was no problem at all. It was nice talking to you guys.
What's your favorite brand, Faisal? I'm curious.
My favorite brand.
Like, I feel like you're not loyal to anything. Like, not even Johns Hopkins, which is an amazing, institution.
No, my thing is once I learn more about, the brand, then I lose,
okay.
Interest. Yeah.
But you got to have one brand.
I have the list of brands I hate the most, but not the list of brands I like the most. You know what I mean?
His favorite brand is the Branding Deep Dive podcast.
There you go. All right. I'll take it. We'll end it on that.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you all for joining. We hope you had as good of a time as we did having this discussion. We'll see you next time.